It's a pleasure to have Bernhard Kerres join us today. As far as I know, I just mentioned Bernhard and I have a shared friend, Alex Osterwalder, who connected us as I was looking for some great speakers. And Bernhard, correct me if I'm wrong, but you live in Vienna, Austria?
Yes.
Yeah. And you are an executive coach, basically, do a lot of work with leaders in various industries. That's my assumption, at least. And Bernhard, when I reached out to him, he was immediately open to speak at this conference, which I always take as a good sign. And he had this fantastic idea of a title, No Agility Without Rhythm. That excites me a lot. And I'll now hand over to you, Bernhard. Also, feel free to give a brief introduction about yourself, because I'm sure I didn't cover a lot of the things. And we're excited to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saurabh and Susie. Wonderful being here. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, you might wonder what a former opera singer does on a conference stage of agility. I wondered that as well. And luckily, Saurabh actually agreed that I can connect the title somehow to the field I know a lot about, which is music, especially classical music. Well, I wasn't only an opera singer, but I actually ran kind of mid-sized technology companies as CEO and CFO and COO with a size of, up to 250 million euros turnover. I also had a startup, brought it to Silicon Valley, did not make the big bucks there, but had a great experience. And today I work as a coach, not only with leaders in industry, across industries, but also with scientists actually, and definitely with musicians. I'm not a Scrum Master, and I probably at some stage in my life should do a course with Susie and Saurabh. I've learned a lot from these techniques, and I've actually applied some of these techniques. And funny enough, I teach actually a course called Be Your Own Manager for classical musicians. And in the last lecture, they can actually teach. And one of them, a wonderful musician from Salzburg, actually used a Scrum methodology to say how they actually work as an ensemble. I found that absolutely fascinating. So don't expect from me the kind of key and buzzwords of agility, but probably something else. I would love to run that as a bit as an interactive session. And in a moment, I would love actually, if the ones of you who would love to do that, to actually see you on video, because there's a little experiment I would love to do with you. So if you can switch on your videos, that would be lovely and awesome. At the end, I will leave enough time for a Q&A. And for all the ones who are already interested in it, there is actually a Spotify playlist for that, for this session. And you find it either on my Spotify account or also on my webpage under Agile100. Now, thank you so much. It's lovely seeing a couple of faces from around the world. And I'm very happy to read that we have many, many people actually from Vienna here. I would love to do an experiment. Clapping works fantastically. Yeah, we all know how it does, exactly. Now, what I would love to do is everyone to simply clap agility. Go ahead. Don't be shy. Good, good. Cool. Thank you very much. Were you able to see the others a bit? It's actually very good. There is a few you can put yourself on, which is the whole view of everyone, called the gallery view on the top right on Zoom. And I would love to do that once again. Let's clap agility. what was the difference between these two clapping exercises? Anyone?
Rhythm.
Rhythm, yes. What else?
Pace.
Pace, yeah. Actually, yeah, and syncing, exactly. Example,
Enthusiasm.
yeah, a bit more
Enthusiasm.
synchronized.
The
Yes.
levels.
The levels, yes. The difference, the main difference, and it comes with synchronized and so on, silos versus organized. Thank you very much, Karthik. Brilliant. What happens is, when I say, you know, clap agility and I let you do, everybody does their own thing.
Yeah.
That's what happens, right? As soon as because I happen to be the speaker today, as soon as I actually clap, everybody tries to follow my rhythm. And that's actually the very first kind of learning in leadership, is that we as leaders need to be aware that whenever we are in the room and we do something, even not saying, please follow me, but just doing something, everybody will follow me and it will be more synchronized. That can be very good sometimes. Sometimes it can be a bit tough. It is this first kind of lecture, actually, or point in leadership to be aware of. Now, when I read up on agility, what you Google it today, right? And as I actually studied Latin and ancient Greek, I'm always interested where the words come from. And agility has a lot to do with fast, with speed, and here able to move quickly and easily. Interesting. Interesting. So that would be a fast rhythm all the time. When we have fast, actually all the rhythm in music is connected to our heartbeat. Interesting enough. And andante, which means going, is something like 80 to 100. That's not too fast. Yeah. A presto is 180 to 200. Yeah. Beats per minute, beats per minute. Yeah. And it's the same heartbeat you would actually have when you are running. All of us who make a lot of sports, they measure their heart rate all the time, even when they're sleeping. And if it's something, you know, largo, that is a rate of 40 to 50. Now, everything, and that's fascinating in the music, is actually connected to our heartbeat. Now, when I hear agility and a whole system around agility, I get a bit kind of scared, because that somehow means that we are always going fast. And that is something which could be very, very dangerous in my experience. Now, in music, actually, we have a wonderful example. When you take a wonderful Mozart piano concerto, and there is one on the playlist, it has a traditional concerto has 3 movements: a fast one, a slow one, and a fast one again. Very simple. If you take a symphony, it has 4 movements: fast, slow, faster, fast. Yeah. So each symphony, each piece of music in the classical music is actually made up of different tempi. It's not always fast. Yes, sometimes it's fast because it engages us, it gives us a good energy. Sometimes it is also slower because we need this time to reflect, to let things happen to us. And that's one of the points I also want to make on leadership and agility is that we should not underestimate in all the sprints we are doing and with all the agility that we need to have time to slow down. And especially as I work a lot in creativity and with very creative people, even with entrepreneurs, you know, entrepreneurs doing a startup, they are kind of high speed all the time. Well, my role is actually to slow them down. Because only when they slow down, they have the ability to start to reflect upon what is actually happening. You can make the same analogy in sports. You know, the interval training is one of the best trainings you can do of running fast, walking a bit, running fast, walking a bit, running fast, walking a bit. That's how you actually train in sport. So probably in agile leadership, we need to actually think about building in these quieter times to reflect, to see for creativity, and to give space that creativity can actually come by itself. Because one of the fascinating things is, and I don't know, I would love your opinion on that. I mean, I get my best ideas in the morning under the shower or during a walk or in the mountains or in nature or on holiday. Never actually when I'm in the office, when I'm running from one meeting to the next, even not in a brainstorming meeting, definitely not in a sprint meeting. Yeah. They are great for process, absolutely amazing. But in these processes, I argue that we need to build in these periods of quietness where creativity actually can grow. It's the only place where it can grow, where new ideas can come. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. It would be probably be pretty dangerous for me if I had great ideas every day under the shower. My team would kill me for that. Wouldn't be that good. But sometimes it is good. Well, music is not only about rhythm, although rhythm is the amazing base of all music we have. And that is fascinating to see. There is no music without rhythm. Perhaps a tiny little exception is, or the attempt to do music without rhythm is by a wonderful 20th century composer, György Ligeti, and you have one of his great pieces on the playlist. He actually tried to build harmonies with long notes, one over the other and the next and so on, moving there, taking away as much rhythm as one can take away. Still, time is there, and as soon as time is there, there is also rhythm. But let's talk a bit about harmony. And I would love to start with that part with an African proverb, which many of you will know. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Well, that puts agility a bit in question again, I know that, yeah. But the interesting thing about harmony is that it brings different voices together. Harmony is not unison, it's not everybody singing or playing the same note, definitely not. That would be really boring. Harmony is different voices playing together, listening to each other, building on each other. And actually, one of the greatest things in classical music is what we call modulations, where we have one key, and through modulation, then harmonic modulation, that goes on to a different key. And that's fascinating to listen to. Yes, there are certain kind of laws about modulation, how you can do it. But you know, the best composers surprise us all the time. And I find that actually interesting for us in teamwork, in working with teams. It is to actually listen to each other, to have these different notes, to build chords together, and then often to go through a modulation probably somewhere else than we expected to go in the beginning. And for leaders, that actually requires that we take a step back and don't insist that we need to stay within that key, but that we allow these modulations to happen in certain periods of time, that we even encourage them from time to time so that we actually can learn from that and go into a direction which might be different to the one we set out with. And there, everything I heard about agility is actually really good, because that's exactly what it is. And that's where I use it often when I teach people about goals and working with their goals, because so many people have one fixed goal in their mind. And when I teach that to musicians, as a former opera singer, I always tell the story saying, oh, I would love to sing Sarastro, which is the lead part in Mozart's Magic Flute, at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Wow, you know, what a goal, right? To sing that. Well, you know better than me that such a goal doesn't really make much sense, that you rather actually depict it and modulate it to a way which actually goes to the core of it. Is it important for me to sing that role? Then probably it doesn't necessarily matter where I sing it, or do I need to sing it in that specific opera house? On the other hand, I might, as I do, just love New York and would love to sing in New York. But does it need then to be Sarastro, one of the leading parts there? So one can have actually this conversation, even with oneself, when thinking about goals. In a team, you have to have it. The third element on music is actually melody. And well, I guess that many of you have melodies in your ears, in your head. We often link melodies to the most beautiful and memorable events in our life, to the times when we fell in love with someone, with a special dance, sometimes also to the anthem of our favorite football team, our favorite songs. This is our song. The tune, the melody, is always the most memorable part in music. Again, it doesn't really exist without rhythm. And I put some of the most wonderful violin literature on the Spotify playlist with really beautiful melodies, just to actually enjoy that kind of melody. As leaders, we might actually think in the very first movement that it is us playing the melody, us taking the lead in the tune. Well, it's not. And that's something, an example I do not necessarily take from classical music, but much more so from jazz. There is an amazing jazz musician out there called Wynton Marsalis. And Wynton is probably the most prominent jazz musician right now. He's a jazz trumpeter. He's actually not only a jazz trumpeter, he's one of the best trumpeters in the world, and I played the trumpet for a couple of years. He even played some classical concertos. He actually writes classical music too. But his mission is to preserve this great American culture of jazz music and big bands. So he founded Jazz at Lincoln Center. Whenever you are in New York, go to Jazz at Lincoln Center, and if you can see Wynton, it's the best you can have. Well, there is this superstar, Wynton Marsalis, playing with his orchestra. Many leaders in the business world would think, okay, that's Winton on the front row all the time. Yeah, right in front there, like a conductor, like the lead soloist. No. Winton, yes, he plays a couple of solos, but you normally actually have to look for him really hard because he sits right in the middle of the trumpet section, right at the back of the orchestra of his big band. And yes, if there's a solo to play, he'll stand up, he'll come in front, play his solo, takes his bows, loves his applause, but goes back into the trumpet section. And then someone else actually from this wonderful group of musicians gets up, goes to the front, plays a solo, and everybody listens, enjoys it, his colleagues enjoy it, and Winton will sit in the back and enjoy it even more than everybody else. Now, leadership is not playing the tune all the time. Leadership is much more about making the space and providing the base for others to grow and for others to perform. And leadership is enjoying that others actually take a step forward. Now in business, and it doesn't matter if you're in technology or other businesses or so, it is, I think, a key learning from people like Winton Marsalis to actually take that step back into the group very, very obviously and let others shine, give others the space and the room to develop. And there, that links wonderfully to this first little experiment we did right at the beginning, where we did these two different clappings. As soon as I clapped with you, you tried to synchronize. Now, if you're sitting in front in a meeting or standing on the same space in a sprint meeting, everybody will look at you. They will try to do everything to see actually what you're doing, where you're from, and what you are inclining so that they actually could do the same thing. Leadership is taking a step back, giving the others the space, and you need to do that very, very proactively. Otherwise, it doesn't work, and it doesn't work not because of you, because you want to do it, but because of your role as a leader, which you might have from the hierarchy or from the organization. Now, before I open that up to questions and comments from you, and I will hope that we have an interesting discussions as there are so many people in the room from all over the world, which is really fantastic. We started speaking about rhythm, and rhythm is the base for all music, but it needs different tempi. It needs fast, slow. It needs to be exciting, and it needs to provide actually some peace. So in all we do, especially in that busy time we are living in, from going from one Zoom meeting to the next Zoom meeting and so on, we also should make sure that we ourselves actually have every day this little space of creativity, but that we also, as leaders, give that proactively to our team members. And they're just, I did for a startup again, a leadership workshop, and we spoke about, team and time management and so on. And they themselves actually came up after the workshop to say, we do not have any meetings in the mornings anymore. Meetings start after lunchtime only, so that everyone has a creative space every single day. Now, we spoke a bit about harmony, and harmony really lives from the modulations from one key to the next key. Modulations, and when you go back to to jazz, but also in classical music, if you listen to G.S. Bach or so. I mean, he has modulations which are absolutely fascinating. He starts out in a C major, everybody knows, and it's this brilliant white color, and ends up in something like A sharp minor. And you don't know how he does it. But he does it in this absolutely beautiful way of actually modulations. So encouraging our teams to do this constant change. Yes, it goes in a direction, but still enabling that change, making sure that we listen to each other, that we know what kind of modulation is possible. That is leadership. And the last point I made is leadership is not piping the tune all the time, but is giving others the space for their own solo. Well, these were a couple of thoughts on agility and leadership. And I hope you actually enjoy my little playlist. That would be lovely. It's there really different and parts of music. And I would love actually if we can enter into a bit of a discussion, and I'm happy to take any challenge because then I can learn too. So I'll open it up to questions.
Perfect. Bernhard, thank you very much, first of all. I got surprised. I got surprised right away when you said that you were a former opera singer. I didn't know that. So, and I checked out your LinkedIn profile when we connected, and that was like very far down the list. So it wasn't as prominent as so that I could find it, but that was really good. Now, while people are thinking about questions that they might have, I already took some notes, and I do have a few questions, and I'll just.
I have one, if I can.
You go first.
What was your favorite role when you've been opera singers?
My favorite role was always Sarastro in Magic Flute. That is just written so perfectly for the voice. Yeah, it was really great. It just felt sometimes a bit funny when I was, in my end 20s singing this old wise man.
Mm-hmm. It's a nice role. Thank you very much for answering.
Thank you, Susie.
Do you have a recording of you playing that role or singing that role? Nothing on YouTube. I think
there might be some very old VCR recording somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
Okay. Okay. So I'll start with the clapping exercise, Bernhard. And I found it very fascinating. Really, the moment you asked us to clap the second time, I noticed myself immediately going for the type of rhythm that you had basically demonstrated. And you, of course, brought up this point that, hey, you have to be aware of this, and whatever you do as a leader, good or bad, other people might follow. Now, when you think about the work that you do with leaders, different levels, different organizations, different industries, when they become aware of that, how does that change their behavior? Do you have a few stories without, of course, naming people, but...
I do have a few stories. The first story is actually that it is very, very, very hard for leaders to accept that and to see that. Really tough. So what I see actually very often or sometimes is leaders leaving the room and leaving the room to others. Really going out and trusting others to do that, which is very hard, especially when you are in a startup or so, when you're the entrepreneur. Also, one of the things is to actually, it's very basic, but we all know that when you go, even when we sit down at our dinner table with our families, we always sit in the same space, right? It's actually good to mix that up, as a family, as much as in your boardroom or in your meeting room, so that people don't sit in the same space again. And there is a wonderful, actually, little exercise as a coach you might do is, as a leader, leave one seat free and say, this empty chair is actually the leader's chair. And either you leave that empty throughout the whole meeting, or you invite actually people from time to time to say, why don't you sit in that chair and be the leader for the next 20 minutes? So you can play around a lot with putting people in a chair, taking them out, sitting differently, and changing just these tiny little things, always being aware that when you speak, even if you don't speak, even if you just make a face, people actually will realize that and react to that.
Yeah. No, I like the point you mentioned, for example, with this empty chair being the leader's chair, which to me, now while you was talking about this, basically brings two messages. Number one, it doesn't always have to be my chair as the leader, or I don't always have to be the leader, because that chair is the leader's chair and that's empty. So it's by definition, by default, not necessarily me. And second, when you invite people to sit in that chair and you give them permission to be the leader, I've seen in the past that this is exactly the encouragement that a lot of people need in order to then speak up and take the lead. They do have ideas, they do know what they want to do, and they're just waiting for this permission. Sometimes they're hesitant because they don't know whether it's okay to do that, to take the lead. And I think with this simple act, you could do that. Now, then you moved on to the topic of slowing down from time to time. And you mentioned you don't have a lot of experience with Scrum, etc. And in general, there are events to reflect, being a review where you reflect mostly about the customer demands, the retrospective about how we're working. But I agree with you. I do see too many teams rushing through those events. So they do the inspection and adaptation, but it's not like they slow down to do it. And in many cases, I do see the danger in teams that they don't come up with the ideas that would come up in scenarios that you explained, like taking a walk or just slowing down, having some quiet time. So would you, and this is like very generically asking, would you extend the time or play around with the formats? Like, what would be your encouragement, your concrete ideas for people to experiment with in order to slow down and come up with better ideas in terms of their continuous development?
I would actually work on the format and change the format frequently. And yes, sometimes in any methodology, it is good to have very fixed formats. But if you take a customer review there, a customer review meeting, it's a good example actually, because, you know, sometimes you can take a customer or a typical customer for a walk. Yeah. And actually you can do that even via Zoom. I did that a couple of weeks ago and it was really funny. I did it for some of my coaching clients. Yeah. And we switched off the videos. We said, we all go for a walk. Yeah. We put our earphones in. We all were walking in different parts of the world. Yeah. And we were talking about different things. And in the end, I said, you know, this was a wonderful 1.5 hours. We really learned a lot. Now, what photo, what picture in front of you symbolizes what actually happened in the last 1.5 hours? And they all took a photo and shared it with everyone. And these different photos meant so much to people, significantly more than actually the words spoken. So my point there is, by changing the format, by giving people something to actually remember what has happened, you can create so many meaningful encounters, significantly more so than by just a standardized meeting. That does not always work, absolutely, but from time to time to do that is amazing what you learn about customer needs, about the next steps, about actually also the anxieties of team members and so on.
I like that. So I also do that. I have, like, every other week I have a coaching session, and then with my coach, not where I am the coach. And we always used to do this over Zoom and video, not just to connect like from face to face. But we have now done several sessions over phone. And I use always those sessions to walk, especially if the weather is nice. And you have sometimes even better conversations. So I can highly connect to that and also recommend that. Now, let me take a few questions from the audience. And I'll just go first in, first out. And Cherish asked, we are a startup that was recently acquired. The new leadership team is very command and control. What is a good way for that person, a Scrum Master, to help the leadership team see the beauty of Agile? What comes to you? I mean, Susie and I have opinions here, but they're asking you, Bernhard. So
I might have a different opinion on that. When somebody is very much command and control, that actually means that very often that they are insecure, that they still don't trust you. And that is probably a good time to build up trust. Now, my suggestion actually would be to go to the new leadership and have a conversation about trust. What gives them trust? Yeah. What is for them building blocks of trust, and focus actually on them first. That will actually enable them to get a bit out of this command and control way, because they can see, oops, I can trust these people, and they are actually doing something in a direction which is interesting. This is very, very difficult, and let me give you one music example from that. Yeah? It is the difference between a young conductor and an experienced conductor. One of them is a young conductor goes on stage, starts Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, and stops immediately and says, Saurabh, you were late in your entrance on the second violin there. Yeah. We start again. Da-da-da-da, da-da. Susie, you're flat. Yeah. So that's a young conductor. That's also command and control. Well, an experienced conductor actually will play through the first movement of this wonderful Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which everybody knows. And he listens, or she listens, and sees and what's happening and so on. And they will not change every little so-called mistake, but they see it as their job to understand the source of where these mistakes, so-called mistakes, come from. And then we'll address the source of that by that actually changing 10 to 15 different mistakes. But this gesture also of letting somebody play through builds immense trust on both sides. It needs the trust of a conductor to actually let somebody play for 20 minutes and not stopping them if there are things you don't like. And on the other hand, it builds trust by the orchestra, because the orchestra members say, wow, he really trusts us and he takes us seriously. So building up trust is the key here.
Yeah, and I like the final point that you mentioned, in both ways.
Yes.
Not only the conductor trusting the orchestra, but also the orchestra trusting the conductor. And ultimately, this helps them to become a team and create something wonderful for their customers, for the audience. Right? Let's go to the next question from Ingrid. She's asking, you were talking about leadership. Do you think you could compare the Scrum team to a cappella bands in way of working, so being self-managed groups?
Good question. Well, I would need to know more about Scrum teams, but I think, yes, you can actually compare that. And they're not only a cappella bands working without leadership, but self-managed teams. They're actually even orchestras. The most famous one is the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra in New York, but there's also the orchestra, big symphony orchestra, Les Révolutions in Paris, which plays even huge, difficult pieces without a conductor. Now, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and you can look them up on the internet, they actually have a lot also on leadership. And there are kind of a couple of things in their leadership style of self-managed teams, which I find fantastic. So each part is actually, in a way, they play something, and one of the orchestra members sits outside to listen, not to conduct, to listen to the others playing that part. Their role is not to say, Saurabh, you're late, Susie, you are flat, or something like that. It is answering questions the orchestra members have and asking them questions. Yeah, like, Saurabh, how did you feel about the beginning of that motive? Susie, can you actually hear the others playing? Yeah. And with these questions, it's not about saying you were wrong, but it raises awareness about issues they might not have been aware of. So very difficult. And the other thing which is also important there is humor. Yeah. It is having a bit of fun. Yeah. And we are sometimes in a much too serious environment. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong. Yeah. Let's celebrate it. Let's learn from it. Let's move on. Yeah. And this kind of humor, I think, is important to learn from that.
Yeah. I like that piece of one of the team members stepping out from time to time and observe and ask and basically give feedback based on questions that they're asked, right? Not going, as you mentioned, like you were late, you were flat. I like that a lot. And I think a lot of teams could take inspiration from that, especially teams that, for example, don't necessarily have a dedicated Scrum Master or a coach assigned to them. So building up that capability themselves of observing and reflecting and asking questions and giving feedback could definitely help teams to become more and more self-managed in this case. Thank you for that, Bernhard. Now let me see. There are a few other questions, and I don't want to like skip anybody. Regina is asking, moving to self-managed teams is the current point of focus for her Scrum or for the Scrum Masters. They're still in the command and control mindset. Oh, there was actually no question. Another person is saying thank you. This is great. Now, what is the name of this chamber orchestra, which is so collaborative? Can you put it in the chat, Bernhard?
Fierce chamber.
That would be great. Then people can look it up or Google it themselves. As I'm not seeing a lot of other questions, I do have one. So you mentioned this thing about providing the space for creativity. Now, sometimes I see teams be too focused on the execution part, and I think you brought that up as well. Now, when you work with organizations, with leaders especially, who might be asking you similar questions, do you have like a rule of thumb in terms of how much time to give people to be able to act more creative? You brought up this one example of a group never starting meetings before lunch, only after that. So do you have a rule of thumb there?
So my rule of thumb is between 20 and 50% of your time. Yeah. 20% being the absolute minimum, and that should be on the typical Fridays without meetings, which some of my clients do. That really works well. No meetings on Fridays, no phone conversations on Fridays, no emails on Fridays. Yeah, just giving everybody time to, finish their week, do the things for the next week, and so on. Yeah, so that's the bare minimum. And 50% is like that client does actually a half a day every week. Yeah, it's somewhere in between, and it depends on the organization, so that you actually can make that happen. And it takes a bit of learning for the organization. For some, the Fridays work well. For others, work the half day as well. What I personally do is I have in my diary once a month, so every fourth week is what I call a creative week. Yeah. I don't take any appointments in that week. Yeah, I work, I write, I generate, I go for walks if I want. Yeah, because otherwise I can't stay on top of issues and actually create and think new thoughts. So it's somewhere between 20 to 50%.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are organizations that have this 20% time, right? 3M is famous for that. Google is famous for that. I haven't heard of organizations like going up to 50%. Now, just to make sure, and I'm not saying this is wrong, right? I find this very fascinating because I realize this in myself. I can drown in so-called daily work and keeping the lights on work. But every time I do that, I realize there's so many important things that I don't get to cover, that I don't get to work on because I'm not making time for it, right? I can't jump from writing an offer to a client to writing a great piece of content about a certain topic and then go back to something else. In order to be able to write a great piece of content, I've realized myself, I need to start my day doing that. And nothing prior to that. Other people are night owls. They can do that best in the evening hours. People are different, right? But the point is you need to have time, really time. Now, how do leaders react when you share this with them? What percentage of them is willing to give their organization, their employees, the time and space to actually come up with creative ideas?
I'm very brutal to my clients and very frank. So I ask them saying, when there's a CEO coming in to me and say, so, how was your day? Or how was your week? And they say, extremely busy. I was running from one meeting to the other and so on. And, so many meetings, really exhausting. And then I say, okay, great. Did you do some work too? And that kind of thing, they look at me kind of saying, going to meetings is my work. And I say, is it really? Yeah. Are you really moving yourself, the organization and everything forward by attending meetings? Yeah. And that gets them into actually thinking themselves. And when they realize, when they are at the point to realize saying, they are probably not really adding value anymore. Yeah. That's when they actually allow others to go the same way. In some cultures, especially in bigger corporations, work means I have meetings from 8 to 8. That's what work means. Yeah. And leaders think that's what work is. Yeah. But if you encourage them to reflect on that and see actually where did they have a really creative input, how did they create it, when did they create it, things start actually to change.
So once they start working on their own behaviors, on their own habits, they're also willing to give a bit more freedom to the people working with them, working for them. Huh?
Yeah, it's often what happens with especially younger entrepreneurs and so on is they come from a corporate culture or from any other culture and they think, they need to work from 8 in the morning till midnight, and be in meetings and phone calls and so on all the time. When they realize how powerful it is to have some creative time where they can really reflect, work on problems, move forward, have creative thoughts, then they are so excited by it that they automatically actually put it towards the organization saying, that's how we're going to do it now. I have had this great realization. And that's actually the best way how it can happen.
Yeah. So this reminds me of many years back when Jack Welch was still, I think, CEO of GE, and he did a few things that were probably not the best thing that we would like to see in leadership today. But in one of his books, he mentioned that in his calendar, he has every day 2 hours blocked, and it says, looking out of the window time. And I like that a lot. So that stuck with me. And now that you're talking about this, this brings up this memory, right? Looking out of the window usually is not considered as doing work. But you're not just looking out of the window. At the back of your head, like you're processing a ton of stuff, you're coming up with ideas, and those might be the things that then drive an organization forward. So thanks for bringing up that memory again. Yes, Bernhard.
Let me make just one point about night owls and morning persons, and I might be very unpopular about that. I'm not a morning person, but what my scientific friends who are behavioral scientists and neurologists and so on have proven in the meantime to me is that creative work best works actually in the mornings because our brain works actually similar to the battery of our mobile phones. They get recharged overnight. They're really fresh towards the morning, and energy gets lower and lower towards the evening. And as being definitely not a morning person, the only difference is I need probably 2 hours to wake up, where others need 30 minutes or 15 minutes. That's the only difference. So try to keep the mornings actually for your creative work, because that's really the time when your brain is at its best. And that's science. I'm sorry.
No, it's in favor of my habits. So I'm definitely a morning person, and I realized over and over again it helps me so much more to do the creative stuff right when I wake up. And sometimes it even works better if I'm not at a screen. So when I tend to write, I start writing on a piece of paper, and then when I want to get it exactly right here, everything on pieces of paper, that is the best way that works for me. Bernhard, usually we ask people, like, what is the final thing you want to share? I think the message you just shared was already good, but still I want to give you the chance. Is there anything else that you would want to share with these people as like the final message of your session today?
Yes. Download the playlist, go on the weekend out for a walk. It is a very eclectic playlist. See what happens. And yes, if you want, please share whatever happened with me. I would love to hear from you.